My name is Christy, and I've helped thousands of teachers pass the TExES Core Subjects EC-6 exam. And today, I'm going to help you. This video is going to prepare you for the Core Subjects EC-6 Math subtest. And this video is going to cover three things: what's on the test and how to study for it, the most likely concepts that will be on the test, and we're going to look at a few practice questions. There is a lot to cover, so let's get rolling. Now, the Core Subjects EC-6 Math consists of 5 areas called competencies. These are mathematics instruction and processes, number concepts and operations, patterns and algebra, geometry and measurement, and probability and statistics. And as you may already be able to tell, each of these competencies contains an entire section of math education. But don't worry, we'll break it down piece by piece. And to test each of those pieces, stay with me to the end and check out our test-aligned practice questions. I'm going to walk you through what you need to know for each competency. Let's start with mathematics instruction. Now, this is pretty straightforward. It's really just how you teach math. Within the first competency, there are 2 main things that will show up on your test. First, how to incorporate manipulatives and other tools, like calculators, into your lessons. Counting blocks, tangrams, fraction tiles, and color counters can all be used to enrich students' understanding of mathematical concepts. You'll need to know what they are and when it is appropriate to use them. So, for example, if you're asked what manipulative would best help students understand that 2/4 is equal to 1/2, fraction tiles would be the best choice because students could see that together, 2 1/4 tiles are the same as a half tile. The second half of this competency is pedagogy. This means you'll get questions about teaching math. Let's take a look at standard K from this competency. The beginning teacher uses a variety of formal and informal assessments and scoring procedures to evaluate mathematical understanding, common misconceptions, and error patterns. So basically, being a teacher, you'll need to know all about pre-assessments used to assess prior knowledge, the difference between formal and informal assessments, and formative and summative assessments. Since this is math, it's helpful to know about connecting math to the real world and to other subjects like science, music, and business. It's also important to know how to align assessment with instruction and what to do with the results, meaning how they can be used to effectively impact your instruction. So basically, instructing and teaching. Again, like a teacher. Now that we've covered the teaching part, let's start digging into what math you actually need to know. Starting with number concepts and operations. Simply put, you'll need to be able to understand how to combine numbers and how different numbers relate to each other, which is what fancy math people call number sense. So this means you need all the basics: how to add, subtract, multiply, divide, use exponents and parentheses, all that good stuff. And you'll need to be able to do all of that using the order of operations. Remember PEMDAS? And with whole numbers, decimals, and fractions. You know, teaching kids these things they're famous for loving. Moving on to number sense. Remember that one where we talk about numbers relating to each other? So how do numbers relate to each other? Number relations include factoring, magnitude, and equivalency. And if you need to brush up on any of those, you can watch the videos in our study guide. We've got the link to it in our description. But let me show you a quick clip of one right now. How about we brush up on factors?
Factors can be used to simplify and solve many problems. Factors are numbers or expressions that we can multiply together to get another number or expression. Factors can be numbers. For example, 2 and 3 are factors of 6 because 2 times 3 equals 6. Factors can also be terms or expressions. For example, x plus 1 is a factor within the equation x plus 1, y plus 2 equals 15.
And just like that, we're through with competency 2. And next up on the tour, you'll notice we've arrived at Competency 3, Patterns in Algebra. Let's take a look around. You may already know what's coming here, solve for x. But you'll also need to understand slope-intercept form and how to create an equation from a data set. Solving for x is pretty straightforward. These tests will give you an equation, like this one, and then you have to solve for x. So you would simplify it as much as you can, balance the equation, and you would find that x equals 5. We'll talk a little bit more later about how to solve problems like that one. But for now, let's see what else is hiding in patterns in algebra, like slope-intercept form. For this one, you need to really know one specific equation. Y equals mx plus b. In this equation, m is equal to the slope of the line on a graph, and b is the y-intercept, hence the name slope-intercept form. So if you see the equation 3x plus 4 equals y, the slope is 3 and the y-intercept is 4. Last up in this competency, creating equations. Also, apparently making equations is a math skill. So when you create the equation, you'll be given words and have to translate them into a number sentence. So you'll need to be able to identify keywords that indicate what math actions you need to take. Here is just a small sampling of words you'll see and the mathematical operation they indicate. And you thought this was a math test. Turns out, just for fun, they're going to test us on language too. But don't worry, if this looks like a foreign language, we translate it all in the study guide linked below. This brings us to geometry and measurement, which might just be the most straightforward of all the topics we're covering, because you're going to need to know, well, geometry and measurement. The word geometry really just means the study of shapes. So you'll need to know the attributes of basic shapes. So that includes using the Pythagorean theorem for triangles and knowing how to use different formulas to find the area and perimeter of all the basic shapes. Ooh, we really have a great video on this in our study guide. Let's take a sneak peek inside the guide quickly.
The perimeter is the whole distance around the outside of a figure. It is a one-dimensional measurement, so it always has to be labeled in units such as inches, feet, miles, or centimeters. The area is the amount of surface inside a figure. It is a two-dimensional measurement, so it will be labeled in square units, such as square inches, square miles, square centimeters, or square kilometers. Here are the formulas for finding the perimeter and area of squares, rectangles, and triangles.
See? Super helpful. But again, to really have the confidence you deserve, go subscribe to a 240 study guide. You can get the study guide and this test and all the other EC through 6 subtests. Now, what about measurement? A big one here is learning to estimate measures like weight and length and choosing the appropriate units. It helps to have some real-world examples to compare to, like the ones we provided you here. So if someone asks you the height of a classroom, you'd likely measure it in meters. Millimeters, centimeters, and kilometers just wouldn't make sense because your answer would be either really large or really small. All right, the 5th section is probability and statistics. And this, folks, is where we get our math nerd on, and I'm going to encourage you to roll up your sleeves if you haven't already. Kind of like that last section, this one is pretty straightforward. You need to know about probability and statistics. But just because this area has a small range doesn't mean it's simple. If you don't understand these concepts, you're going to get these questions wrong. So make sure you take the time to brush up on how to do these problems. Let's start with stats. In my experience, what's almost guaranteed to show up on the test are central tendency measurements. What's central tendency measurements? They're the mode, median, mean, and range. And here's a tip. You'll probably get mostly graphs and charts to look at. For instance, you may be shown a graph like this one and asked, which type of movie is the most popular among children? First, make sure you know what they're looking at. then read the chart. Or you might have to use the numbers from the chart to do a simple calculation. All right, circling back to probability. A lot of this boils down to simple calculations of how likely is it that a given event is going to happen. And this really boils down to taking the number of successful outcomes possible divided by the total number of outcomes possible. I know we're flying through these, so if you feel a little like you've gotten whiplash, try the study guide. Now that we've gone over some of the big concepts, let's look at some practice questions to show you how those concepts can appear on the test. If you want a lot of practice questions, you can click the free practice test below. At the end, you get a score report on how well you did on that test. Now for questions. Let's head back to the beginning with that mathematics instruction and processes piece, starting with manipulatives. Marcus is a first grade student working on place value task cards at a math center. Each task card shows an image of base 10 manipulatives, and students are to write the corresponding number in standard form on their recording sheet. Marcus selects a card that shows 100s blah and 3 1s cubes. On his recording sheet, he writes that the number shown on the card is 13. Based on this scenario, which of the following tools would be the most effective to provide Marcus? Marcus is struggling to recognize that each place needs to be filled by a digit, even if it is 0. Therefore, a place value chart would be an effective tool for Marcus to use. With the task card described in the question, a place value chart would help Marcus recognize that there are 3 1s, 0 10s, and 100, making the number 103. Let's look at one from the pedagogy piece. In this question, we're dealing with assessing students during the first week of school, meaning the teacher is trying to get a better understanding of her students' current understanding. By giving students the assessment in choice B, the teacher would be able to gauge which of the upcoming vocabulary words her students are already familiar with. This allows the teacher to create lesson plans perfectly matched to the students' current ability levels. Just like that, we've crossed one entire competency off. On to number concepts and operations. Remember the combining numbers part I told you about? You'll need to remember the order of operations. Let's look at how that is reflected in a question. Simplify the expression 82 minus 100 divided by 4 plus 6 times 12. As we start to run through PEMDAS, there are no parentheses or exponents in the expression, so we can skip those steps. Then we move on to multiplication and division, from left to right. So 100 divided by 4 equals 25, and 6 times 12 is 72. So now our expression is 82 minus 25 plus 72. Now we can simplify the remaining addition and subtraction from left to right. So our final answer is 129. Boom, nailed it. Time to make sense of number sense. Bobby is buying gumballs for 7 of his friends. There are 51 gumballs before Bobby makes his purchase at the store. Bobby wants to give each of his friends the same amount of gumballs and not have any gumballs left. Which of the following approaches can Bobby use to find the greatest number of gumballs he can purchase to give his friends? Okay, so this might not sound like the factoring questions we talked about earlier, but I promise it is. It's just hidden a little. It's in disguise. If Bobby wants gumballs for each of his 7 friends and none left over, we need to know the multiples of 7. There are only 51 gumballs in the store, so our number has to be lower than that. So our best option is this one. Make a list of the multiples of 7 and then purchase the highest multiple of 7 that is less than 51. Now, it's close to impossible to know every single detail about every math problem that may come up on your exam, but the 240 study guide can get you pretty darn close. You'll walk into your test with confidence that you can pass. Now let's look at an algebra question. Which of the following options shows a logical and correct first step to solving the algebraic equation given. Even though this is algebra, we still need to remember PEMDAS from earlier. So we start with the parentheses. If we distribute the 3 and the -5 to their respective parentheses, we'll get this choice. 6x plus 3 minus 5x minus 20 equals 11. We're technically done with this question, but let's try for some bonus points. Okay, so there's no bonus points on the EC-6, but you're going to need to know how to manipulate an equation all the way down to solve for x. So let's practice. We already know that the first step is to distribute. Next, we combine like terms on the same side of the equal sign. Finally, we isolate the x by moving the -17 to the other side of the equal sign. This leaves us with x equals 27. Nice. On to slope-intercept. Which of the following equations is written in slope-intercept form? This is where you need to remember y equals mx plus b. The only equation that is in this format is this one, y equals 3x plus 5. Recognizing slope-intercept form is just the first step in using the equation. To really feel confident dealing with slope, you should check out our study guide where we walk you through all of it. This brings us to creating an equation. Maria baked 6 dozen cookies for her classmate. There are 28 students in her class. Each child received 2 cookies, and Maria gave 6 cookies each to her teacher and her principal. Which expression shows the number of cookies she had left over? Let's figure out how many cookies Maria started with first. She baked 6 dozen, so 6 times 12. Next, we need to take away all of the cookies she gave out. So we need grouping symbols. We include 2 cookies for each of her 28 classmates and 6 cookies for the principal and the teacher. So this choice is the correct formula. We finished patterns in algebra. We've got just 2 competencies left. Next up, geometry and measurement. We're told the west wall of a square room has a length of 13 feet, and they want the perimeter of the entire room. Well, squares have 4 sides of equal measure. So the perimeter, the area around the figure, would be 4 times 13, which is 52. Here's a measurement question. Which of the following is the best estimate for the height of a 1-story house? A meter is about the length of a guitar, and a 1-story house is about the same height as 5 guitars. So this is the best. Without looking, Jessie draws a marble from the bag shown, replaces it, gives the bag a good shake, and draws again. What is the probability that Jessie drew a red marble both times? On the first draw, the probability of drawing a red marble is 3 out of 10. Since the marble is replaced, the probability of drawing a red marble on the second draw is still 3 out of 10. So the probability of drawing red on both draws is 3/10 times 3/10. And last but not least is statistics. The circle graph shows the results of a survey of 150 students. How many students chose basketball as their favorite sport? This problem gives us survey data, a pie chart, and asks how many students chose basketball as their favorite sport. I see an 8% in the wedge for basketball, so I'm going to pick that choice. Oh, rats? That seemed too easy. Let's take a step back and try again. Since 150 students were asked, the percentage doesn't equal the number of students. Instead, we need to multiply the percentage by the total. So 8% times 150. 8% times 150 gives us a total of 12 students. And that's the last of our practice questions. There is still plenty more to learn. Did you know that our study guide has 402 practice questions? If you really want to make sure you're prepared for the core subjects EC-6 Math exam, take the next step and subscribe to the 240 study guide. It has hours of videos, so you can watch and or listen while you're doing chores. It is test aligned with hundreds of practice questions, so you know precisely what you need to study. And it has a money-back guarantee. So click the link below right now to get started.